The lights didn't flicker. They failed. 1 second. Stephen Kong felt the familiar vibration of the rooftop unit humming beneath his boots. The next, nothing. No warning. No fade. Just a sudden, unnatural silence that made his ears ring. Stephen froze, wrench still in his hand. 66 years old. 12 stories up. San Francisco swallowed by darkness all at once, as if the city itself had forgotten how to breathe. "That's not right," he whispered. Below him, the skyline vanished. Glass towers became shadows. Traffic lights died mid-command. A siren screamed somewhere far off, then cut out abruptly, like even emergency had limits. Stephen climbed down carefully, every movement deliberate. He had learned to move that way in recent years. Slow, measured, respectful of joints that no longer forgave impatience. Patient and calm. That's what people said about him. What they didn't know was how much effort Calm took now. His phone buzzed once in his pocket, then went black. No signal. No backup. Just his own reflection staring back at him from the dead screen. Older than he felt. More tired than he ever admitted. He thought of Sally, probably sitting in their Kansas City kitchen with the news on too loud. Thought of Joy, typing questions faster than answers could exist. Thought of Sparky, waiting by the door at 6 on the dot, convinced the world ran on routine. Stephen exhaled slowly. The building behind him creaked, settling into the dark. Somewhere inside, people would already be getting scared. Elevators stopped. Air systems failing. Panic warming faster than any heater ever could. This was why they'd called him. This was why they'd flown him out. Stephen clicked on his flashlight and stepped into the stairwell, the narrow beam cutting a fragile path downward. Each step echoed too loudly, like the building was listening. As he descended, a thought surfaced. Unwanted, sharp, impossible to ignore. What if this time, the system that's failing isn't the building? The darkness didn't answer. And for the first time in his life, Stephen wasn't sure light would come back just because he knew how to fix it. Stephen reached the mechanical floor just as the last backup generator failed. The low hum beneath his feet coughed once, like an old man trying to clear his throat, then vanished. The lights blinked, flared too brightly for a split second, and went out for good. Darkness rushed in, heavy and immediate. Voices followed. Confusion, irritation, fear pretending to be impatience. "Hey, what happened? Are we stuck? Someone fix this." Stephen clicked on his flashlight. The narrow beam carved out a small, fragile island of order. He kept it steady. He always did. "Everyone stay where you are," he said calmly. His voice carried farther than he expected. "This building isn't in danger." He didn't add yet. He knelt beside an open panel, fingers moving from memory. 40 years of repetition had burned the patterns into his hands. Touch. Pause. Listen. The building spoke in vibrations, in absences. Old systems told the truth if you didn't rush them. This one told him nothing. No surge marks. No blown breakers. No obvious failure. Stephen frowned. "That's strange," he murmured. A younger technician stood nearby, restless. "City grids down everywhere. We just wait, right?" Wait. The word landed wrong. Stephen had built his entire life around not waiting. Around being the quiet solution when others shrugged. The man you called because he didn't panic. Because he stayed until it worked. Upstairs, someone pounded on a stairwell door. A woman's voice cracked as she asked about the elevators. Heat would start rising soon. Fear even faster. Stephen stood, slower than he meant to. His chest tightened. Not sharply, not enough to alarm anyone else. Just enough to remind him of the tests he'd postponed. The doctor's voice he'd smiled through. Probably nothing. His phone buzzed once in his pocket. One bar of signal fought its way through. "Sally, news says the blackout has no cause yet." "Sally, Joy's worried." "Sally, are you okay?" Stephen found the anomaly by accident. Not in the wiring. Not in the control systems. In the silence between them. He stood still in the mechanical room, flashlight off, listening. No hum, no vibration, no distant echo of power trying to return. The building wasn't broken, it was waiting. That shouldn't happen, he whispered. The younger technician shifted beside him. What shouldn't? Stephen didn't answer right away. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a folded printout he carried everywhere now. Test results he hadn't shown Sally. Numbers circled in pen. A note in the margin, monitor closely. He folded it back up. This wasn't just a blackout. Something deeper had shut down. Citywide. Cause unknown. No cascade failure. No overload. No human error. Systems didn't fail like this unless they were forced to stop. A building manager approached, panic barely contained. People are stuck. We need answers. Stephen looked at him, then past him, at the dark stairwell, at the faces lit by phone screens, hope thinning by the minute. We don't restart yet, Stephen said. The word surprised everyone, including himself. What? The manager snapped. We need power. And we need to not kill someone, Stephen replied calmly. If we force it blind, we risk overheating the system when it comes back. That was true, but it wasn't the whole truth. The rest of it sat heavy in his chest. Stephen realized, suddenly, painfully, that he was afraid. Not of the system, of himself, of what would happen if he pushed too hard, ignored the warning signs the way he always had. This blackout wasn't exposing a weakness in the city. It was exposing his habit of overriding limits. His phone buzzed again. A message from Joy slipped through before the signal died. Joy, Dad, you don't always have to be the one who fixes everything. Stephen closed his eyes. Midway through the darkness, with people waiting and pressure mounting, the truth reframed itself with brutal clarity. The thing he'd called patience his whole life had really been endurance. And endurance, unchecked, was starting to destroy him. When Stephen opened his eyes, he knew the choice ahead would cost him something. He just didn't know yet what that something would be. The pressure didn't explode. It tightened. Minutes stretched into something heavier than time. The building manager paced. The younger technician checked his watch too often. Voices upstairs softened. Not calmer, just tired. Stephen felt it in his chest again. Not pain. Not panic. A quiet insistence, like a warning light you couldn't tape over anymore. Stephen, the manager said, lowering his voice, we can't just sit here. Stephen nodded. I know. He looked at the control panel. At the system he'd mastered decades ago. At the sequence he could restart in his sleep. He didn't touch it. Instead, he reached for the radio clipped to his belt and called Central Operations. We're holding, he said. There was a pause on the line. Say again. We're holding until full grid confirmation, Stephen repeated. This system needs to come back clean. That'll delay restoration, the voice warned. Yes, Stephen said. It will. He felt every eye in the room turn toward him. This was the cost. Not dramatic. Not heroic. Just a man choosing to disappoint people now so they wouldn't get hurt later. The manager shook his head, frustrated. The younger technician looked relieved and afraid. Stephen leaned against the wall, breathing carefully, counting the seconds between heartbeats the way the doctor had shown him. He thought of Sally's hands on his chest that morning before he'd flown out, of Joy's last text, of Sparky waiting by the door, convinced routine could keep the world in order. For the first time, Stephen allowed himself to imagine not being needed. The idea hurt more than he expected. Then the radio crackled. Grid stabilizing, a voice said. Stand by. Stephen straightened. Lights flickered, once, twice. He didn't move. When the power finally surged back, clean and controlled, the systems responded the way they were supposed to. No alarms. No overheating. No chaos. The building breathed again. Someone exhaled behind him. Someone laughed, shaky and relieved. The manager turned to Stephen. You were right, he said quietly. Stephen nodded, but the victory didn't land the way he'd expected. Because the real shift had already happened. He had chosen not to push. And nothing had broken. Something else had. Something old. Something dangerous. The belief that his worth lived in how much he could endure. Stephen stayed behind after everyone else left. The building was warm again. Elevators moved. Voices returned to their usual pitch, already forgetting how close they'd come to fear. The younger technician clapped him on the shoulder on his way out. "Good call," he said. "I wouldn't have waited." Stephen watched him disappear down the hall. Neither would I, he thought. Not before. He stepped outside into the cold San Francisco night. The city glowed again, windows lit, streets alive, power restored like nothing had happened. People hurried past him, eyes on phones already full of explanations and theories. Stephen stood still. His phone buzzed. "Signal back. Sally, power's back here too. Sally, are you okay?" Stephen didn't answer right away. He thought of the moment the lights went out. The silence. The fear he'd mistaken for responsibility. The decades he'd spent believing that being calm meant carrying everything alone. He typed slowly. "Stephen, I'm okay. Stephen," and I didn't force it this time. 3 dots appeared, then disappeared. Then, "Sally, I'm proud of you." The words hit harder than any emergency ever had. Later, back in the hotel room, Stephen sat on the edge of the bed and loosened his boots. His chest felt steady. Tired, but steady. He pictured Sparky waiting by the door at home, tail thumping, convinced that constancy could summon people back safely. Stephen smiled faintly. The miracle hadn't been the blackout. It hadn't been the unexplained failure of a city's power or the flawless return of light. The miracle was quieter. It was a man who had spent his life restarting systems finally choosing, for once, to wait. Stephen Kong lay back and turned off the lamp, not because he had to, but because he could. In the dark, he breathed easily. And for the first time in years, the darkness felt like rest, not fear.